Hey folks, it's Christmas Eve and it's ghost story time. Now, a couple of years ago, I published a book which is called The People's Ghost Stories. This is an interesting book because, as I put on it, I thought it was time that I compiled a book of ghost stories, a different book of ghost stories, stories straight from the horse's mouth. Not stories handed down from generations to generation that often turn into Chinese whispers. Not stories gleaned from hours of research in libraries or trolled from the internet. Not stories penned by writers with creative or imaginative minds. Not stories from professors, parapsychologists or supposed experts in the paranormal. But stories from you, Joe Public. First-hand accounts, not stories, accounts. A story can be made up. An account is what you believe happened to you. First-hand accounts from those who have experienced ghosts. Whatever ghosts are. I have a couple in here that I find fabulous. And these were sent to me by you guys. And over the last 32 years of talking to people about ghosts, I know a true account when I read one. Hello, Richard. Back in May 2016, I awoke at 3:15 in the morning to go to the bathroom. I was on my own in the house as my wife was away, but otherwise everything was as normal. What was different was that I opened the bedroom window blinds that night as I like to wake up with the sunrise, whereas my wife always likes them closed. Upon returning from the bathroom, I happened to look out and noticed my neighbour's 4-year-old daughter out in their garden. At 3:15 in the morning, that seemed a bit unlikely, so I realised that I needed to take a closer look and be sure of what I was seeing. Clearly, she was sleepwalking and had somehow managed to get outside of the house without waking her parents. I turned on the main bedroom lights and reached for my mobile phone. Slightly unsure, I went back to the window for a second look. There she was, standing at the end of the garden near the rear gate. It was at this point I noticed she was facing away and standing on a child's scooter, which had been left out from a busy day playing in the garden with the family. She had a short bobbed haircut, dark hair, and was wearing a long nightdress. She was standing with one foot on the scooter and the other on the floor to balance her. It was a full moon that night, so whilst there was plenty of light, I couldn't tell the exact colour of the dress she was wearing, only that it was light in colour, probably white. I went back to the bathroom a second time and settled the dog, who had now also woken up early and had wanted his breakfast. I returned to the window a third time, now fully awake and wondering what next to do. I could now clearly see that the child was holding onto the handlebars of a scooter and that she held her head forward and slightly to the side, swaying slightly, just as if she was fast asleep. I remember seeing her bobbed hair fall to the left as her head went from being upright to slumped down to the left. I watched her attempt to lift her floor standing leg and attempt to scoot, but watched her quickly bring her foot back to the floor without successfully moving the scooter. I watched her repeat this at least 3 times before being startled by a black cat that jumped up into the fence. The cat clearly and immediately noticed her as well in the garden and cautiously aborted its attempt to jump down into the neighbour's garden, choosing instead to jump into ours. Somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes passed before I made the decision to alert her parents. The rear garden led onto a road, and this was potentially a dangerous situation, certainly for a sleepwalking 4-year-old. I scrolled down my contacts list and found my neighbour's phone number, hesitated, and then called them. It was 3:26 a.m. when I made the call, according to my call history. He didn't answer, obviously. I got dressed before taking one final look out of the window. She was still there, still on the scooter and still trying to move it. I went downstairs and round to my neighbour's front door and rang the bell. Both parents answered the door, startled and wearing dressing gowns. I told them, so sorry to wake you up. I've just seen your daughter in the garden. She looks like she's sleepwalking. Mum immediately ran upstairs while Dad half slammed the front door whilst frantically rushing to the back garden. I just went back inside and up to my bedroom window to see Dad retrieving the scooter and tidying the other garden toys left lying around. I then went back to bed feeling accomplished and quite proud that I had avoided a very serious potential situation. The next day I saw Dad and apologised to him for waking them up. I explained what I had seen and that I thought it necessary to wake them. He replied, "What on earth were you on about last night? She was fast asleep upstairs and we have 2 child gates in place. And anyway, she doesn't own a nightdress, only pyjamas. Plus, she's got long blonde hair. Of course she wears pyjamas. Whose children wear long white nightgowns in 2016? Startled and embarrassed, I could only apologise and explain that I must have been sleepwalking myself. But I know what I'd seen. I had triple checked that I wasn't daydreaming before acting. I was wide awake, completely conscious, and can still recall every second of that experience. The day after that, I saw Mum getting the kids into their car, who was rather more sympathetic and curious than her husband. She commented that their dog had strangely and unpredictably gone crazy earlier that same day, standing off and aggressively barking at the empty corner of the room. I saw their daughter, who indeed had long blonde hair and was taller, which dismissed the idea that perhaps their daughter really was sleepwalking, and the parents were too embarrassed to admit it. I still to this day can't explain the whole thing, but I know what I saw that night. Mark from Mickleover in Derby. That to me is a pretty good ghost story. And the other thing is, I'll explain something to you, shall I, guys? I was going to do an M.R. James ghost story for you instead. But when I started reading it, perhaps my age, because I'm an old git now, it's written by a Victorian writer. And I found it quite hard to read it and get it right. I made a couple of mistakes there, not a lot, but a bit. But when reading the M.R. James stories, I couldn't get through them without making mistakes. Whereas reading someone's modern accounts makes it so different. I have another one here that gives me proof. The only proof I've got that ghosts exist are the accounts given to me by parents whose children have imaginary friends. Because approximately 35% of children under the age of 5 have imaginary friends. And we call them that because it's our way of dealing with it, but I can assure you they're not. They're seeing ghosts, and it's usually ghosts of grandparents as much as anything else. So listen to this one. Hi Richard, my husband, children and I lived and ran the Lord Byron Public House, Lowerdale Road in Derby. I don't know if I saw a ghost or I dreamed it. I went into labour and had our son at 26 weeks. It was a very worrying time as the doctors didn't know if he would pull through, but after 17 weeks he was well enough to come home. The night before he was due to come home, we set up the Moses basket and got everything ready on my husband's side of the bed, as he said he would do the first few nights. Satisfied everything was ready for the following day, we all went to bed. In the night, I woke, looked up to see a man standing at the end of the bed. Your worst nightmare. I was so scared I couldn't move to even nudge my husband in bed with me. I couldn't scream or do anything but just look at the man. I thought he was going to rob us. He slowly moved around to my husband's side of the bed, stopped to look at my husband, and then look at the Moses basket with the baby in it. He then looked at me, turned and walked through the bedroom wall. I then woke my husband to tell him, I'm not sure if I'd just seen a ghost or I've just had a very vivid dream. My husband started to laugh. I described the man in detail. My husband immediately stopped laughing and went white. I asked what was wrong. He said I had just described his dad, who I had never met, as he died when my husband was 7. A couple of days later, we went to visit my husband's mum with our new baby, who we had named George, after my husband's father. When we got there, I asked her if she had a photograph of her husband. Wait for it. And she went upstairs and came down with a battered old photograph. And sure enough, it was the man I had seen in our bedroom. From Sarah Sargent. People's Ghost Stories. You can buy it from richardfelix.co.uk. $12.99, signed copies available. Guys, I hope you enjoyed those. As much as I enjoy reading them, even if I make mistakes, because that's me all over. You know what they say, don't you? The man that never made a mistake never made anything. It's Christmas Eve. I'm off round to stay with my son William, daughter-in-law Harriet, grandson Henry, and granddaughter Francesca for Christmas. I hope you all have an extremely happy Christmas. I wish it would have snowed, but can't win them all, can we? Unfortunately. Thanks for listening, guys. Do sleep well. Don't have nightmares.